So this is where we stopped. We spoke about Mango, and what we did before the break is we simply set up a project. Okay? And this project we call this as Subway. And what we are trying to do is mimic something that we discussed in the previous class. So this is where we stop. So what is now the next step is to create mapping classes. You can call this model. Some of us call it as domain. Okay? What are other names? Some of us just call this as Pocho, plain old Java objects. Some of us call it as is there any other alternates you've heard of? DTO, data transfer objects. Okay? So DTO basically means any model classes. Okay? Sometimes you even call them helper, bean, value, whatever it is. It's basically trying to capture data. Okay? So we're going to create a class and then we're going to map it to the Mongo database. And of course, we're going to create a repository interface. We're going to test the database first. Then we're going to create a controller, and if time permits, we do the testing of the controller. And the testing of the controller is usually done by the tool called Postman. So I'm going to use it. I'm not sure whether you tried it during the REST controller. Okay, so you sort of know this. And then, of course, the coding part of Timeleaf, I'll take it offline. Okay, so that way we keep this discussion focused for maybe 35 to 45 minutes. So let's get started. What I wanted to do is I want to create some simple classes. So I had my desktop workspace where I put in some of these classes. So the first class that I've created here is called ingredient. Okay? Because yesterday we were talking about sandwiches, and then of course I said that you have multiple ingredients that you want to put in. So we had a very simple simulator that we talked about as Q and blah blah blah. So I thought I'll just extend this example. So you can see that I have created a simple model class called ingredient. I made this as a document database. And I put enum, which is basically the different types of ingredients you can have. So I classified that as bread, protein, dairy. Maybe I can even have something like soup. Okay, so if that is acceptable, and sometimes I do wraps in Subway, so you can keep adding any kind of categories here. So it's a very simple class, and all these things come from Lumbo. The only new two tags that we are trying here is document and ID. Okay, so that's how it works. So you can see that I am trying a different package structure here. So let me show you how it is. I don't know if the magnifier is useful, but let's try. No harm trying. I don't know why. This helpful. Okay, so maybe I just call for magnifier. It's a very funny software, but let's try. So you can see this. We have different styles of packaging books. Okay? So when you say packaging, you can go by component style packaging. That's usually beginner style of packaging. So when I create an application, I'll have a controller package, a model package, a service package, and probably utility and other things. This is very beginner because you want to know where to put your technical component inside. But as you become a professional, you're going to try different kinds of application. For example, you're going to create microservices. You're going to slice your applications into very interesting ways. So the general direction in which the industry goes is they go by domain-driven names. Okay? So they use the names which very much reflects the business functionality and the business data of an organization. So if I'm Subway and I'm trying to look at the key things that I'm dealing with, probably I'll have an ingredient domain object. I'll probably try to collect these ingredients to make a sandwich. So you can see I have another package called sandwich. Okay? And when the customers interact with this particular sandwich artist, I'm going to create orders. An order can have one or more sandwiches delivered to a particular customer who comes in the either the online queue or the physical queue. Okay. So here you can see I have completely taken a different stand on project packaging structure. So I'm going to go by all ingredients, things go into the package ingredient. I'll have similar ones for order and sandwich. Makes sense? Okay. This is another style of packaging. So when you go to internship, very likely you'll find this kind. Okay. In internship projects, you won't see controller repository services. You will see domain-based packaging structure because companies find that more friendly, more reflective of their own organization. So you have any questions here? Yes, please. Yes. Subway.com. Yes, you can. You can. What's the point of this? That's a good question. So the gentleman here is asking me, why is this always a long thing? Can it be very short? Okay. So this usually reflects your domain address. Okay. So suppose I'm ibm.com, my folder structure will be com.ibm. Why is it needed? What is it trying to help us with? See, if you think about a big company like IBM, IBM will have many divisions. Okay? And if you have packages, it is very likely that more than one application is using the class customer. So they'll have conflicts if they use the normal way of naming packages. So if I'm IBM and I would like to name my packages, let me take my sheet so that I can tell you what is reverse DNS mapping. So when I'm IBM.com and I have many applications being loaded in my area, so my website is called www.ibm.com, okay? Or maybe .com.sg. This is how I look at the local IBM website. Now here there can be so many applications. There can be finance department, there can be say client department, there can be sales, there can be marketing, there can be at least 100 applications which are running inside this particular domain address or DNS server. Now it is very likely that a common class name like user is found in all these applications. So how do I have unique names? The easiest way to address it is always reverse the domain address and start using package names. Okay? So that's why when I create a package structure for this particular company, this particular style of application, my packaging will be sg.com.ibm, reverse of my DNS, followed by my department, and followed by my application one. Okay? So then I'll have my class as user. So the same thing which is done by a different department will have a slightly different name. So this is going to be by HR. They're going to even call this as application one, no problem, but their user is different from. So this is how I create unique names. So it's a general practice that I create. Make sense? You're a beginner. You don't have to torture and shoot yourself on the foot. You can have smaller ones. Okay? But understand it's the reverse of the domain address for any company that you work for. You're going to work for google.com. It's very likely com.google than many other names. You're going to work for NCS, similar. Accenture, similar. Every company will reverse its DNS address name followed by departments, subunits, and then application. So this way, there can be very many classes which has got the same names and they won't conflict because we have packages that uniquely identifies them. Make sense? That's the science of packaging. It's a beautiful question. Any other question? Can we go on? Good, okay. So that's the science. So I've just used that and then I've tried to create my Subway and ingredient. Now you can see that if I want to create an order class, for instance, if I say order and I want to create a domain object, so let me try creating here, just on the fly. I'm not being perfect, but I'm trying. Okay. I have some pointers that I have to remember, so I'll also have that to remind me. So maybe instead of order, I'll do the sandwich first because sandwich is the next one that is getting created. So I'm going to have a class which I'm going to call this as sandwich. Okay? And then this is again a model class. So when you say a model class, definitely things like data works well. Of course, you can also say, you can also treat this as a REST resource if you want. Okay? That's up to us. But you can also say no argument constructor. You can say all argument constructor. All this is good. And of course, you make this into a document. Okay? So this is how you identify the particular document. So I hope I have addressed it. Okay. So here you can see I get my imports first. So whenever you're stuck with imports, you can either go to source organize imports, or I'm a keyboard freak. So whenever I'm typing, you can see that I always do Control S just to save my work. The same way, whenever I'm trying to type a new API, I have no patience to wait for the content assist because I'm doing it very fast. Right? So what I tend to do is I just press Control Shift O frequently. So that's how you can see that the imports are getting auto organized. The same way, when I want to have the fonts to be formatted, I always use Control Shift F. You may not see me moving the mouse, but being the keyboard geek, you'll always see me giving these instructions to Eclipse. It's just a matter of habit. Okay? So once I have all this and I save it, I should be able to recognize them. So why is data? Okay, it's too fast, so it got confused. Okay. It still is giving me problems. Sometimes I'm too fast that it gets confused. It doesn't have any data, so it keeps complaining. That's fine. Okay, so we'll come to it a little later. So what I plan to do is, I think maybe I even have this in the slide because I was doing this yesterday and testing it for myself. So if you look at the mapping examples here, um, do I have a sandwich example? Oh, unfortunately, no, I didn't copy it. Okay. So let me just type I have a list of parameters. Let me just type it in. Okay, of course, the easiest one is ID. Okay. I'm going to say ID is say type long. So this is the default. Then of course I need a private string name for the sandwich. Okay. And of course, you see, we tried this size thing, right? We can try that. So we can say not null. Why is my okay? I think this one comes from the validator framework. So if I want the validator framework, I should add that in. So I'm going to go to the Subway Spring Starters, add starter. Because I want to use the validator framework, I'm going to add a validator by typing validation. So there's no SQL validation. Then there is this IO validation. I'll take both. Okay. So I'll just add these things into my form, okay, and then say finish. And of course, you got to wait for the form to rebuild it. So just give it some minutes because it usually happens in the background. It's quite fast, but so I think this is a patch error that keeps coming with a new version of Spring. Just ignore that. That's no problem. So when I say not null, you can see that it has been included. Okay. So the next one that I want to try is size. Okay. And it's again Jakarta validator. So when I say size, I have a minimum size and a message. So I'm very lazy, so I'm going to just type in these things so that I said I'll finish my demo faster. I'm trying to do as much as possible faster. So I'm going to say minimum character is 5, and then it has to be done into name. So the other thing is I need to put in ingredient list. So what was my choice? I can make it as a list. Okay, so I'm going to say private list, which is from the java.util. I don't take the validation, you have to be careful. And it's going to be of the type ingredients. So let me try ingredients. Okay, and I'm going to call this as anything you want to call. Ingredients is useful for me, so I'm going to say new. You cannot say list because list is an abstract class, so I got to use array list or any kind of solid implementation class. And I got to make sure that the generic templates match so that I don't have any casting issues later. So that's basically how I create a very simple array list of item. And you can say that minimally to create a sandwich, you need one particular ingredient, right? So you can also do the same thing here. So you can say size minimum is equal to 1. And then you can say at least I need one ingredient. Okay? I need at least one ingredient to make a sandwich. Make sense? Okay. So these are the simple validation. Let me check if I have anything else. Of course, you can also try date. So I'll just leave it to the later part. And you can write in any custom constructors if you want, but I'm trying to leave this to free. Same way you can create the next item, which is order. Somebody wants to order sandwiches. You're going to create an order class inside the package order. And let me see what I've planned for my attribute list, because I make a plan and I try to stick to it as much as possible. Just checking if that is fine. Okay, so here I think I used a big list, so I'm going to copy. So in the order, you see I have a few items that I want to worry about, like the credit card and all that. So I'm going to take that, put that inside. Okay. So there's a lot of things, as you can see, document, and then of course I want to make sure this is data. Okay. I want a no argument constructor. Sometimes I'm very impatient, sorry. No argument constructor. I also want an all argument constructor. Actually, data should give you everything, but just in case. So, did I use date? Why is it? Ah, yeah, probably I have used date here. So there's a placed order placed date. So that's why it's using util. Then of course I have a user defined data called user. Okay. And you can use this, or you can create any further user objects. You see, right now it is taking the basic Spring Security user. It's not taking my user. So I can create another custom class called user and add that. And of course, rest of it is basic data type. So you can actually play with all these things. The only thing that you got to map is ID. The rest of it is auto mapped on the Mongo. Okay? So you can put in conditions to validate also. So this keeps it clean. So I have three model object. One is ingredient, one is sandwich, one is order. Okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to finish the ingredient in the demo in the class. And then offline, I go back and finish the order and sandwich view so that we can play around with the whole set. So what is the next step here? So let's go back and look at it. So we created some model classes. So this step is over. So we created a class called ingredient and we created a class called sandwich. Okay. We also created a class called order. So this is basically the mapping part that is complete. The next thing is I got to finish repositories. I don't want to bore you long, so I'm just going to do one repository demo now. I'll finish it later offline. So this is called ingredient repository. Okay. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a repository of type ingredient. So how do I do it? You know for sure, just like JPA, it's an interface. So you got to call that as an interface. You can't create a class, you got to create an interface. So how does it look like? So you go here, this is how it looks like. So you can say, I'm using an ingredient repository. It's going to be a reactive CRUD repository. And I'm going to use the object as ingredient. And if you look at the ingredient data, my primary key is a long variable. So I'm saying the primary key is long here. Very, very similar to JPA, except that here normally you say JPA repository, but instead I'm going to use the reactive repository. So that's the only change. Now later on I may want to code a front end using React. So I decided to expose the database as a direct persistence layer. Okay? So if I don't want the front end to directly talk to database, I should cut this. I should not allow cross origin. But if I want my React application to directly store data without even going through my controllers, what I can do is I can expose the cross origins. So cross origins will enable the back pressure frameworks to directly talk to controller or to directly talk to repository. I decide how I want it. Okay. But I want to show you that there is a possibility. So here I'm putting cross origins. Maybe in the other repositories, I'll keep it clean, okay, so that you can see the difference. So that's all you need and your data layer is done. So how do I know that my data layer is done? Best thing is to write test classes. Only test cases tell you how good your work is. So I'm going into the test package here. Maybe I'll push this code so all of you can see that inside your GitHub as we are scrolling. Some of you may find it difficult to watch the fonts. So whatever I've done currently, I'm putting it inside. Wait. Okay. So probably you'll have a version for you to look at. So that's done. So you can see that, let me check if it's inside. Sometimes Git is funny, sometimes the main branch can take me for a joyride. So Subway, if I click on my source code, I should be able to see the objects. Okay, So we have basically done the repository class, right? Now, interesting part is the test class. This saves you a lot of pain. This is not just for the MongoDB. You can write these test cases even for your normal JPA. Particularly when you're doing project, you're being asked to do something, make sure everything works by writing test cases. Now, how do I test something? I have to have a copy of the ingredient repository. Okay? And this is a Mongo database test. And interestingly enough, you can see that we never put anything inside the application.properties. Okay? So if you look at my property discussion in the morning, I think I was talking about Spring properties. And I want to read this from the documentation. Right? So common application properties. So here in the data properties, we spoke about Mongo, and when we said we wanted to connect to Mongo database, I said there are a few things that are mandatory. You got to define the database, you got to define the username, you got to define the password, you got to define the URI. I said these are four mandatory things. But look at here, my application properties is just empty. So the Spring is very smart. The Spring Boot will go and check for details here. So I have said that this is going to be a Mongo database. So immediately it will go and see if there is any Mongo connection details given. If there is no connection details there, then it will create an in-memory test Mongo database for me to do my project. It's very similar to H2, but doesn't waste resources. It does a very simple in-memory Mongo database. Okay? So that's why you can see that my properties are usually very empty. Otherwise, I have to put in all the properties that we spoke about. So I got to usually, if I have to practically connect to a database, I got to put in details like what is my database, what's my username. Okay, so I got to say what's the username. I got to say what's the password. I got to say what's the URI. These four things at least are mandatory. If not for port number and other things, these four things are mandatory when I want to really connect to a Mongo database. But now I'm not doing it, right? Because I don't want you to install Mongo. Mongo can slow down your laptop. You're already having Microsoft, which is eating a lot of your cycles. And on top of it, we got MySQL. Then we have the Spring. Then we have the React also. So already your laptop is using cuss words to you. Okay. So we don't want to try Mongo, but practically this is the four steps that is additional in the property files to connect. So having done that, so when there is nothing inside the application properties, you can see that the test is smart. But the test must know it is a default boot configuration. How will I set it up? I have two tags that I got to enable. I got to say I'm going to use the Spring Boot configuration and I'm going to help auto configuration. So if nothing is configured, go to the default embedded MongoDB settings. So this is what I'm activating with these two annotations. So I write a config file and I say start the default configuration files. That's only config that I need. Now I go back and write a very detailed test case. So how will the detailed test case look like? The first thing is I'm going to test the data part of Mongo. So I got to use this annotation called data Mongo test. Everything else is JUnit tags. Okay? So what I'm doing is I'm using AutoWire. You already have used AutoWire when you write a service layer and you have injected your repository class inside. Inside the controller, you injected your service class inside. So you already understand how AutoWiring works. It's nothing but a reverse inversion of control, as we say. Okay? So when somebody says AutoWire, a whole instance is created by the server and it is ready for you. So what instance do I want? I want the ingredient repository, interface implementation. So it goes there, it looks for the repository, it knows it's a CRUD repository, so it implements all the template and gets the code ready for you to use. Okay, so that's the first thing that we are injecting. Now when you say before each, this is the initial setup. Okay. So even before I try anything, I want to put some data to load the data to see if it works. So what I'm going to do is I'm saying set up my database. So you know we are using reactive, so that's why flux. And flux usually is a list of ingredients. So what I'm going to do is whatever is existing, I'm just deleting all of them. Okay. So every time I restart my server and I run my test cases, the old records are deleted, so that's clean for me to test. I just create three ingredients. I create a multigrain, I create a ground beef, I create a cheddar cheese, I put in types, and then I say please create these things. Verify that three records has been created. So every time the test case is executed, any test method is executed, this will happen before. Okay? You can also say after each and clear it later. Okay? But I'm just leaving here because when I do the before, I also create my old data. So that's good enough. So if you're very clean, you have OCD compulsiveness, put before, after, all the fun things you want to try. I'm becoming sort of less OCD these days because I've got too much work. So it's up to you. You can play with this. It's a beautiful toolkit. Allows you to test if your queries. You don't have to go and argue with your friend that your code is working. Run the code, the test case pass, you can hand over your code. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to do a save. So I'm saying read all the existing records, find all, see if it has these three records. If all of them is fine, then I go and create maybe a fourth record. I'm going to say I'm going to say I'm finding the record and I'm updating it. So the multigrain bread, I'm going to change this to garlic bread. Okay. So when I fire this test case, you can see that my multigrain bread is changed into garlic bread and then it is persisted again. So it's a very simple test case. Of course, it's up to you to, I hope my recording is not disturbed. Okay. So it's up to you to go back and have fun with more of the repository classes. So you see, I did not write this find all method. Where did it come from? It comes from the template. Okay. So when I simply say inherit repository, count, delete, find, exists, save, toString, wait, all of them are coming by default, just like your JPA repository. Okay. So even when you did JPA repository, you had seen this one. You don't have to do the basic CRUD. Only special finders you write classes. Right? So the same fun here. You don't have to do anything extra. So let's see if the test case runs. So for that, I have to start my subway. So let me restart the subway. Okay. And if I really want to put in any init classes, I can write an init class inside the main method and do it, but I'm not doing anything like that because I want to be running my test case to verify. So I select this test case, I right click this and say, please run it as a unit test case. So you can see that it executes the test case. It does the initial setup. It goes and creates the new record. So you can see that when this code gets executed, the first thing was it created the full list. Then it went and changed the first record. How will I know? I go back to Postman. I look for a get request. I say send. And then you can see multigrain, cheddar, protein. Okay. Now what I can do is I can select this particular should save. Maybe if I just check if this particular test method works. Okay. So I'm going to say run this method alone. Okay, so let's try if the data is different. Oh, why is my garlic not changing? Something funny. Let us check. Maybe I'm trying to do something that overrides it. Let me check. I always have too many test codes. Okay, there's something going wrong. I create an ingredient, find. Oh, I didn't say save. I only checked for equals. So if I want to do a change for that particular record, I should say dot save, then verify. So which I didn't do. That's why it's sort of clearing. So I can go back and then write a save test case and have fun. So that is all the step 3 is about. So what did I do here? I created a simple repository interface, and here I came in and wrote a test config file. This is to enable default setup for me, and then I wrote my test case. So in order to test the ingredient repository, I wrote a test case called ingredient repository test and went and put some test cases inside and saw that my layer works well. Now the next part is to go to controllers and have fun with them. So controllers is also very, very straightforward. So if you look into my controller class here, I can say that my endpoint is ingredients. I made this as a REST controller. You cannot use normal controller. But look at the fun. I can inject the same repository. I can simply say AutoWire, okay, and inject the repository class inside. And then whenever there is a initialization, the repository is connected. So I write any number of methods that I want. So when I simply say get map, it finds all the records that are existing. That's how I'm able to get that inside my layer. So here I can also have another maybe URL, different URL from the ingredients. I can simply say I100 and test this. So it's nothing like what to name for your path. Okay. So when you say get ingredient and you use a ID, it gets one record. If you don't say anything, it gets everything. If it's one record, it gets you one ingredient. So the only difference is normally you will only say return ingredient. But because it's one item, I use mono. And wherever there is a list of item, you will see that I'm using flux. That's all, the reactive code. Everything else is just the same. So a get method is always followed by a get mapping. Whenever you're trying to do a insert for the first time, you're going to do post mapping. Okay? Whenever you're going to do an update, you're going to say put mapping. Okay? And then of course, whenever you want to delete, you're going to use the delete instruction. Okay? So you can go back and test this out. So here you have ingredients is basically your normal list. So when you say I100, this should come from the controller. I100 path not found. So I did something wrong. What did I do? So let's restart the server. I think I have the cross origins which is interfered. I should put that down. Because when I change a path, I have the code must be recompiled. So which was not done in the last time. So it's sort of doesn't understand what I want. So when I try to give a get instruction of I100, you can see it recognizes. So if I want to create a data and post inside, I can say post raw data of type JSON. I know the fonts are too small for you to see, but unfortunately I can't magnify also. So let me see if there is a view menu. The Postman is an ugly tool. Sometimes they keep changing things without telling us. Is there a zoom? No. I don't see a zoom at all. Oh man, very bad UI. Okay, never mind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this body, then of course JSON type. So I'm going to say introduce a fourth ingredient, that's broccoli. Then maybe I'm going to call this as a soup. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a post request. Okay, so it's inserted. So I want to verify what are the list here. I go and get the ingredients. So you see this ingredient is added to the list. So originally I had 3, now I added 1. So you can try the same thing with update, delete. So it's pretty straightforward to complete a controller. It's just going to be a decision between either mono or flux. If it's one piece of data, you're going to call that as mono. If it is going to be a big list, you're going to call that as a flux. Okay? So this is the major change in reactive controller and reactive repository. Are we okay with this? So I can go back and do a time leaf UI for you, and then I'll notify you by email when I'm done. So these are the basics you got to understand regarding reactive program. As I keep saying, gladly this is not for exams. So I'm happy even the whole class will answer. So we want to keep it simple. Your examinable portions, there are enough things to ask question about, so the other lecturers will worry about it. My job is only to teach you code. So you have any questions here? I'll take it up.